Hi, I'm Mitra Sorrells, Senior Reporter at PhocusWire, and I am delighted to be your host for today's New Reality With. This is a series of one-to-one interviews with industry leaders, and it's sponsored by Salesforce. You can reopen travel with support from Salesforce's Work.com. For this episode, we welcome Richard Harris, co-founder and CEO of Intent. It's a real-time data platform that uses machine learning to predict behavior and value of users for digital businesses, including many in travel, such as Booking.com and Expedia. So Richard, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. And to our viewers, if you have questions for Richard, please submit them via the Q&A button, not the chat button, but the Q&A button. And so, Richard, let's jump right in. You know, I have to say, I've been really looking forward to this discussion because I think I am not alone in feeling like one of the most stressful aspects of this whole situation, separate from the virus itself, of course, is just the complete lack of predictability, all the unknowns. And you're in the business of predictions, so
that is true.
Hoping maybe you brought your crystal ball today. You can help us feel a little bit more at peace with everything.
Sure.
First of all, how are you doing? How are you doing? You know, are you in your office? You appear to be home right now, but is anyone in your offices around the world?
Yeah. So right now, I think there are two people. Our headquarters is in Lower Manhattan, which was, a hot spot during the first few months of the current pandemic. Right now, my co-founder, Damon, is in the office, and I think one other person. So, especially as we're recruiting, it's a great sales point to say it's about, 15,000 square feet per employee in our office. So you can comfortably distance. But no, we sort of mid-March, our whole company went remote. Many of our people left the city who were living right in New York City. And, we'll talk about this later when we talk about the impacts on the travel industry, but it has been remarkable how effective and efficient we can be over Zoom, exactly as we're doing here. And so that's going to be a big deal, I think, going forward.
And did you say you have offices elsewhere around the globe, correct?
Yeah, so New York City is our headquarters. Our next largest office is London. But we also have a presence in Brazil, in Southeast Asia, in Kuala Lumpur, as well as Germany and Spain. But we're not asking anyone to go into any office where they don't feel comfortable going. And in fact, they're not even open now, but probably will be next week.
So let's talk a bit about the work that you do and what has been happening now through this crisis. So if I understand correctly, a lot of what you do is related to looking at historical data, real-time data, using artificial intelligence to make sense of all of that. What kind of challenges are you facing right now? Because
Sure.
It's such unprecedented times.
Yeah, no, it is very, certainly we, our history is in the travel industry. My personal background is in the travel industry for the last, 20 years or so. And, I think it's probably worth noting we have two distinct sort of parts of our business. The first one, which is, they're all built on the same sort of predictive intelligence platform, meaning, we run a very large machine learning platform that lets customers, so our clients, predict the likelihood of some of the key sort of KPIs or key events in their business. So if you think about in the travel industry for, the big players in the industry, many of whom we work with, predicting the likelihood that a visitor will convert. And so we literally, using only first-party data, so we're not in the business of buying data, transferring data, that we are sort of almost machine learning as a service where we integrate with our partners as a first party. We process their data extremely quickly. So we gather sort of hundreds of signals about user behavior inside of a digital environment. And about 20 milliseconds after a user takes any action in one of these digital environments, we return a prediction on multiple KPIs, but the big one being how likely is this person to buy, sort of looking forward. And not just in that session, but looking forward over weeks and months. And so that machine learning platform underpins everything that we do, because once you have that a real-time prediction of how valuable is a user, what's their future value, there's a million things that digital brands want to do differently in their business. Meaning, if you know that someone's 50% likely to convert, but my average conversion rate across my digital property is 5%, I probably want to treat those people that are 10 times likelier than average to convert differently, right? I want to make sure their experience is perfect and focused on letting them transact. If it's someone who has a 0% chance of transacting, I may want to communicate with them or differentiate the brand experience in some way. So anyway, that platform, so we run those sort of predictions in travel, in non-travel retail, in online education, auto, et cetera. So many verticals. And that side of our business has performed, during the pandemic extremely well. In fact, it's grown about 300% since March. And I think that's sort of isolating the fact that these are incredibly uncertain times. People, brands don't know how the market is going to move, how they should be advertising, all sorts of different things. And the need for this sort of predictive intelligence and making use of first-party data has become even more important. So that's one side of our business. Okay. I just spoke for a long time. Do you want to ask another question, or I can talk about the other side, which is a little more travel specific?
No, go ahead and get into that, and then we'll dig into it a bit more.
Sure. So now, sort of on top of that machine learning platform, that ability to predict future value of users in real time, we have a bunch of applications. One of them is specifically designed for the travel industry, and it's a sort of advertising marketplace. So people who want to monetize their online user base or the inventory they create by virtue of the fact that users interact with their brand experience, we safely introduce ad products inside of transaction sites, which is very heretical. Meaning, if you are a big OTA and you've ever seen an ad for that OTA's competitor in the middle of their transaction path, that's probably us running that behind the scenes. But the reason these brands do it is because we make it safe to do, because we know in real time who's likely to convert versus who's likely to continue their shopping experience at your competitors anyway. We'll introduce those ads for the people unlikely to convert. So, but in that piece of our business, a lot of the money is made, or is in sync with the travel ad market. And certainly as coronavirus spread, the entire ad industry, and then particularly the travel ad industry, experienced a very sudden drop, sort of in line with the 90% booking drops that you saw at the big OTAs, the 95% at the airlines, et cetera. That portion of the ad market just collapsed. And we were not immune from that. Now it's coming back now quite nicely. But I think, that segment of the market was very slow relative to other pieces of the economy. And the fact that we're continuing to see flare-ups with coronavirus in different states has meant that travel generally is sort of, I think, in a pretty cautious or tentative moment right now. So the marketplace, it never went away. People continued to spend on advertising throughout the pandemic. And right now it's very focused on the sort of station wagon vacation, which has caused a bounce in hotel transactions and advertising. But yes, certainly that side of our business felt coronavirus very deeply.
So I guess what I'm trying to make sense of is it a lot more difficult to really understand intent in a time when there are so many moving parts? It's not just if I'm eager to take a vacation, I really want to travel, but there's a lot of countries I can't go to. There's economic issues that people are facing. They're looking at their budgets differently. I mean, it feels like there's a lot more moving parts and puzzle pieces into understanding the user behavior.
Yeah, that is 100% true, Mitra. And I think that's a pretty astute observation, that when you get these sort of cataclysmic shifts in the macroeconomy and in consumer behavior, a lot of the sort of rules of thumb or the business rules around many of the decisions that big digital brands faced, those just went out the window. Meaning, whatever sort of constructs or rules-based decisions that brands would make sort of pre-coronavirus, and that had some element of just rote predictability, those just sort of really broke down due to these cataclysmic changes. What's interesting for us, and I think why we've seen so much growth in that a pure machine learning side of our business, is that people realize that those sort of rules-based methods of making decisions no longer worked. And I think we've seen, there was a wave starting, pre-coronavirus, where large enterprises were adopting machine learning as a key tool and predicting user behavior as a key tool, but it really accelerated very, very quickly starting in March. And I think the question is sort of, well, wait, do machine learning models that sort of originated pre-coronavirus, do they have any meaning post-coronavirus, right? Are they doing anything more intelligent or more effective than just the sort of intuitive rules that business leaders would use? And I think, the answers are varied. There's been a lot of talk about model drift among the nerds, and even in the Wall Street Journal, there's a big piece about this, meaning exactly that. Like, is the foundational notion of your ability to predict, is that challenged even at the machine level by these things? And in some cases it was. It was generally sort of people who weren't doing predictions and machine learned predictions in real time, and that weren't updating them frequently enough. And so at Intent, we've had a discipline for many, many years where we literally recreate and refresh our predictive models every day, sometimes multiple times per day, meaning that the model we used yesterday to predict user behavior for your brand is utterly or maybe completely different than the model we use today to predict user behavior. And we generate these models for every specific brand, right? So it's not a common model. And these predictive models, sometimes we even create them by product category. So in the travel space for hotels versus flights, et cetera. And so we saw zero model drift. Like, the foundational data changed, obviously, like conversion rates dropped precipitously. But if you, one of the key things we do in predicting conversion rate is, say your top 10% of users, how likely are they going to convert, or how much more likely are they to convert than your bottom 10? And, those spreads tend to be in the sort of 25 to 50x range, meaning that one of your top users is 50 times more likely to convert than one of your bottom, say, deciles of users. And those spreads did not change. And that's by virtue of the fact that we have so many inputs into the models, and that they are literally recreated daily by the machine.
So I suppose it's a little hard to know this sitting here today, but potentially a year from now, August of 2021, the models from today are hopefully not useful, right? I mean, hopefully, this is that anomaly period here that,
Yeah, I expect that will be the case. In fact, I expect that next month, the models in use on August 12th will be irrelevant. But if you're not in the discipline of these real-time predictions, meaning you're not predicting how likely is Mitra to convert, and then we'll just use that prediction for the next year. We're predicting it 20 milliseconds after every action Mitra takes inside of a commerce environment, meaning so the prediction we had 4 seconds ago may not be relevant given what you've just done. And that's sort of like what we do, is these real-time, super fast machine learning models.
So give us a sense, what are you hearing from some of your customers in different sectors, different parts of the world? Can you give us a sense of what you're hearing?
Sure. And it is very different, and even, the models that we run in Italy today are very different from, how they were a few months ago. But the models between the US and Italy, for example, are just completely different because user behavior is so different. And we see that as well when we talk to our client base. So I think, first of all, it varies by vertical, right? So in travel, our partners, remain very, very concerned about the future of the industry. And we're concerned about it too. Because I think it's unclear, it's unclear whether something fundamental has changed in the way the world travels, in the way they think about travel. And it's sort of too early to tell how this all shakes out. But I think, in general, my suspicion is something has changed. One thing I will point out is in my very first travel company, which we founded back in 1999, we lived through September 11th. And if you had asked me on September 12th, 2001, has the travel industry changed fundamentally? I would have 1000% said, yes, it has. People are going to be afraid to get on airplanes for the foreseeable future. And I was so wrong about that. So I think when you're in the midst of something, seeing outside of the haze of crisis is very difficult. And so I doubt myself now, about my intuitions. And I think everyone should because, I don't want to pin all my hopes on a vaccine, but I do think if there's an effective therapeutic or vaccine, that will just fundamentally change the game and for travel. So on the travel side, uncertainty and concern. What we hear outside of travel varies a lot. So I think for direct-to-consumer retail, meaning sort of the brands that have grown up online, think like Warby Parker and Casper mattresses and Bonobos, et cetera. This has been an unmitigated good for them because, so many stores have been closed. People aren't comfortable being in indoor environments to do their shopping, and sort of, everything is shifted online, and it's been great. For, offline retailers or omni-channel retailers, they've definitely been hurt by this, and they are trying to move online as fast as possible. And they are probably not as sophisticated as some of the digital first brands in understanding their consumers and their behavior. And so, that's where we can be helpful. But it's an uphill battle.
I came across an article that you wrote last month where you said retailers should dedicate themselves to mastering two key concepts in e-commerce: understanding intention and clearing the path.
Yeah.
So first of all, can you talk a bit more about that? Is that also relevant in the travel e-commerce space? And what does that look like?
Yeah, so 100%. So the key, what I was trying to get at with those two key messages is when you understand intent, really that's about, so, in our world, what that means is literally these predictions of your key KPIs, right? So how likely is someone to buy? How likely is someone to churn? How likely is someone to, bounce and exit your site? So all of these very important metrics about what the consumer is trying to accomplish, right? Where are they on their journey? What are they trying to do? And you need to you can't rely, again, on sort of rules of thumb here. You need to have a data-based foundation to that understanding. And that's what we do, right, is predicting these behaviors. So one is, you need to understand, what is this user, this individual at this moment most likely to do? What are they trying to accomplish? And then the clear the path notion is once you understand that, make sure that your brand experience, if it's a shopping path or the way you're communicating to them, whatever it is, make sure that that's on target, right? Yeah. So if this person is very likely to buy in the next 3 days, you probably don't want to be cluttering your digital experience with ads of any kind, right? Like, to get them where they're going next, or even like a sponsored listing, like where a hotel is paying to be at the top of the sort, for example, which is, very common in the travel industry. You kind of want to put all that aside. That's not the best experience. It's not the best way to maximize the profit of this user. It's like they're shopping for this hotel in Hawaii or wherever, for a 14-day stay. Don't distract them with any of your other ancillary revenue schemes. Just let them accomplish what they want to accomplish. And so without that predictive intelligence, without that understanding of what a user is going to do, it's very hard to make the right decisions, and it's especially hard to make them in real time, right? You can't actually. So you need a machine to tell you that, understand what they're trying to do, and make your experience conform with that.
Okay, so we have a question that's come in. Do these tools work for startups that maybe haven't even launched yet and they don't have any kind of data and historical traffic information?
Sure. Well, the unfortunate thing about data science is that you need data. So if you have no data, it doesn't really work. So sort of just, for those who are interested in this sort of real-time prediction service, the key things to understand are, to produce a good prediction, you need about sort of 100,000 visits to your property per month. I mean, your digital property, your website or mobile site, whatever it is. And whatever the frequency of that key KPI, meaning the thing that you're most interested in predicting, say it's likelihood to buy, that needs to happen about 1% of the time. So you can kind of flex those two, but it's sort of above that threshold is when we can produce very, very accurate predictions in about 20 milliseconds.
Okay. We are just going to take a quick break for those watching on replay. We will be right back after this. If you're looking for more great content, check out How I Got Here, a weekly podcast with people that have led successful startups and created cutting-edge innovations in travel and transportation. Produced by PhocusWire and Mozio, it has a catalog that includes Steve Kaufer of Tripadvisor, Kayak's Steve Hafner, Expedia's Ariane Gorin, and more. We get the stories behind these companies, the highs and lows, and a lot of gritty details. How I Got Here is available on PhocusWire.com and all the usual podcast platforms. Okay, let's get back into it, Richard. Let's talk a bit about the impact of all of this, the coronavirus and, the virtual shutdown of the industry on travel marketing.
Sure.
So first of all, does this accelerate or decelerate any changes that were already happening? And does it require a more disciplined approach related to customer acquisition versus long-term value?
Yeah, it's interesting. So in general, I'm an advocate for more discipline overall, right? And when you think about marketing, right, like if you just look at the travel industry, and I think our industry probably spent $20 billion in Google last year. That's an estimate. I don't have any inside info, but that's a lot of money. Right. And it is, when you look at the big brands in the travel industry, I mean, their spend on Google is like, it's a meaningful line item in their P&L. It's a meaningful line item in how Wall Street values them. And, so it's fundamental. And, I think as Google is verticalized, so they have travel specific ad products. And as they've increasingly sort of dedicated the search results pages on Google to their own products in travel, that has meant that they were able to extract more and more of the sort of marginal profit of every transaction from our industry. Now, for consumers, it makes things a little bit easier. You get more information in that first search return inside of Google. But for the people who are competing in our industry who aren't Google, that makes it very hard. And so, what I would say is, like, if you don't have a metrics-based discipline, and I mean like a strict discipline around your spend in these sorts of channels, it's time. Now, I know the big guys, for the most part, have a very good discipline, but things are changing all the time. Like even just the attribution methodology, like when you buy an ad in Google's sort of hotel product ads, are you measuring that? Are you attributing the right amount of value to that Google click versus all the other touch points? So that's a big deal. But I think, for us, for example, these predictions that we do, so we know that Mitra is very likely to convert. She's now a known user inside of my travel brand. When what we enable our partners to do is, when you see a known user again in Google or Facebook or Instagram, you can now take the prediction that we've generated for you in real time and use that to inform whether you bid on that known user again. So do I actually want to spend a lot of money to bring Mitra back to my hotel booking path? Not sure. Let me consult the prediction, and oh wow, she's super likely to buy. I probably want to make sure I win this auction. Or depending on your strategy, it could be that I don't need to buy Mitra because she's going to come back and book on my site anyway. But when you can inform your bidding with that that kind of predictive power, it introduces a tremendous amount of optimization. So like double digit in Google, triple digit in social. But I think, I think that most brands will have more discipline. And there's been some signaling in the marketplace, like the really big guys are sort of signaling like, hey, we're not going to spend as much in Google after the coronavirus crisis. And then, the next brand will say, yeah, we're not going to either. So they're sort of all telling each other like, hey, why don't we keep bids down in Google? Whether they will stick to that discipline is, I think, an open question, because once one person defects and is like, hey, CPCs are down, I'm going to jump in and own the market, everyone will come back. And that's why Google makes so much money.
And I suppose it's a bit of a catch-22 when you're in a situation where you're somewhat desperate for the customer. It might be harder to then say, no, I'm not going to rely on Google.
Yeah, and this is a sort of debate that I've been having with multiple people in our industry, but there's almost two scenarios, right? So if someone who spends a few $100 million in Google each year pre-COVID-19, they're sitting around with their executive team and they're saying, hey, there's two paths, right? One is, let's introduce new discipline. Let's reset everything. Let's forget Google existed. And let's focus on the things that are long-term, positive P&L channels for us. And let's tell everyone we're going to do that so that maybe they'll do that too. And let's see if we can sort of like squeeze Google a little bit out of the equation, and Facebook and, all the platforms. So there's some sort of notion that the industry and multiple verticals may just reset and try to minimize their reliance on Google. There's another angle though, where it's going to be a free-for-all, meaning there's going to be like a feeding frenzy as the sort of shoots begin to grow a little taller in the travel industry, where it's like, oh my God, we need butts in seats and heads in beds and visitors to our website. And, damned be the strategic concerns. We're just going to spend and try to dominate the comeback of the market. Unfortunately, our industry doesn't have a great track record on option A, like just resetting and being disciplined. And we've got a really abundant track record of just going crazy and fighting each other and eating our own children. So I'm always the optimist, but the data, isn't great.
Someday this will make a great case study in a college marketing class or something.
For sure.
What are your thoughts on Tripadvisor? It's really been pushing itself more as a media platform. I was listening to the earnings call last week, and Steve Kaufer was talking about how, pre-COVID, they had about 460 million average monthly unique visitors that are self-qualified by even being on the site, and they feel really confident about their ability to deliver some high-quality traffic to the OTAs.
Yeah, I mean, I would put sort of Tripadvisor in the same camp as Google, meaning they will sort of live and die. And I have tremendous respect for Tripadvisor. But if you just look at the fundamentals of their business, they are going to sort of live and die based on exactly what we were just talking about, this stance of, wait, am I going to reset and focus on direct to consumer advertising and building one-to-one relationships? Or am I going to go hey, I'll participate in every marketplace and every ad platform? And so if there's sort of renewed discipline, I think that will hurt Tripadvisor in the same way it hurts Google. And if there's a feeding frenzy, that will benefit Tripadvisor as it does Google. I think, the one, I think that's the basic of my stance, but they've been hit really hard.
What about Amazon?
That's a whole other thing. So
another podcast.
I mean, they've tried a few different times getting into the travel industry, and we work with some Amazon subsidiaries with our predictive intelligence. And I can tell you that they are extremely disciplined, but like Google, not everything they do wins. And
Right.
you know, Google's had some spectacular failures, and Amazon has had some spectacular failures. And travel isn't something they've been successful at. There's a lot of speculation of, well, will they buy into the market? Like, will one of the big brands be acquired by Amazon to get in the space? I don't know. But they certainly have the means. I think you really need a window into their strategy. But it's travel is like a massive vertical.
Yeah.
And there aren't too many truly global brands. So I'm sure they could make sense of the market and do well, but they haven't to date.
So we have another question here for you. Do you believe that an antitrust investigation into the tech giants such as Google is warranted? And if yes, how far should it go with curtailing Google's ambitions in travel as an example of its creep into a sector?
Yeah. So again, I always take the data angle on this, and for a long time we've been talking about the notion of datagopolists, right? And what I mean by that is these big platforms like Google, like Facebook, like Microsoft, Apple, in particular, Amazon to some extent as well. And in addition to all the ways that they tend to dominate the markets in which they participate, the common thread between them all is sort of data access and the way that they are very slowly, well, not so slowly in some cases, but they are sort of like boiling the frog, is all around data, right? So if you look at what Apple is doing and Google is doing and Facebook has done, they really are creating walled gardens. And if you try to understand their motivations, like all these disparate moves that these guys make, it's all around data and data ownership and data access. And they do want to be datagopolists, meaning they want to use their understanding of individuals, of us, of users, of people. They want to use that intimate knowledge of people that they have to extract as much as they can from the economy, if I put it most broadly. And okay, what does that mean practically? Well, Apple comes out and will tell you, or Google will come out and tell you that, hey, we want to be super privacy friendly and third-party cookies are disappearing and people can't track you, et cetera, which on the surface sounds good. But when you dig a little deeper, they're really taking pretty aggressive actions to get between brands and their customers. Because, even someone like Apple, the ability to maintain data about a user in the form of, a cookie, they're making unilateral moves to blow up some of the ways that brands use and store data about their users. And it's not because they care about privacy. They're actually just saying, you know what? Google is going to be the only place where that data about users exists. So it's not that it shouldn't exist, and it shouldn't exist beyond the user themselves, beyond the individual making those choices. It's that it will exist, but just controlled by us. So I do think that is a bad thing. And if you are a brand that sells things or is trying to establish user relationships, that is going to come under threat. And this is if you're booking holdings or if you're a brand new travel startup. This is a threat. And A, there needs to be transparency about it, and B, I think there is a case for legislation.
Okay, we will all be watching to see how that plays out for sure. Let's talk a bit more broadly about just the travel industry and some of your thoughts about the future. What are your thoughts about different sectors? Business travel, for example,
Sure.
And how that's going to change. I know you kind of touched on that a bit at the beginning. We can talk a bit about, how that relates to just changes to the workspace and the work environment and
Sure.
all of that.
So travel comment. I do think we obviously think about this a lot because of that sort of media product that I told you about, which is really just in the travel industry. And, I think the sort of mental model I have is where in the travel industry do substitutes exist? Meaning for all the ways I might be active in travel, coronavirus has made us ask the question, is there some other way to accomplish this? And in leisure travel, I'm very confident that there are not good substitutes, meaning if I want to go see my parents, or visit my family, most of whom live in Canada, which I literally cannot do right now. There's no substitute, right? Like I can't do a Zoom call with my 101-year-old grandma, and I can't hug my mom, any other way than by going there. And so, nor can I, understand what it smells like to be on the beach in Bali, other than going there. And so I think like for leisure travel, whether it's, going to new destinations and exploring and seeing the world, or being with your family, there are no substitutes. And so when is the moment it is safe, or people feel comfortable enough to get on an airplane, or Americans are allowed to cross a border, right, we will begin doing that. So I'm very, very bullish. But something's going to need to change, particularly in the United States, for that to happen. Now, business travel, I'm much, much less bullish about. And I sort of mentioned this when I told you how surprised we were at how well functioning a company can be over Zoom, and all the other, and Slack, and, all the tools we use. But, I personally, and I think our company generally, had a philosophy that togetherness is important, meaning being physically beside each other, that we can communicate and build trust and relationships through in-person presence is and was the way to go. And I think I still obviously see lots of value in physical, personal, human interaction. But for business travel, like, we've shown ourselves that there's some pretty awesome substitutes, and we're on one right now, right? Yeah. And so I think Zoom is less expensive than a business class flight to Singapore. And so I think we're going to see a lot of people switching to a Zoom subscription, and that's going to just take a bite out of business travel. So that's how I see it right now.
Yeah, which then, relates to the whole concept of, work from anywhere, so live anywhere. I think Atlassian was the latest company I heard has told its 5,000 employees around the world that they don't ever have to come back to the office. Yeah. So that starts to have big implications just as far as office space and building.
100%. Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned, we've got 20,000 square feet per employee right now. That's not an awesome use of capital for Intent Global LLC, so or Inc. actually, LLC is in. So I think there's going to be a fundamental change in commercial real estate. I know it only in New York, which is sort of an exceptional and weird environment. London even is a little more flexible, but yeah, I think just the way that we work, and we have some people on our staff who are like, oh my God, I need to get into an office. It's too hard to work with my 2-year-old running around. And then we have other people who are like, I used to live in Brooklyn, and now I live upstate in the Catskills. I'm pretty happy, and I'm pretty sure that my productivity has actually gone up by not being in a crowded office. So we're gonna have to figure out how to take the best of what we learned into our path forward.
Okay, so we're getting close to the end here. Before we wrap up, I want to change gears just a little bit. Sure. You spoke on the women's leadership topic last November at the PhocusWright conference in Fort Lauderdale. I thought you had some very interesting insights there about the need to be extraordinarily conscious in recruiting efforts. And that's really how you get to the heart of some of those issues. Now, since then, there's been a lot of events, particularly in this country, that have raised awareness related more so to racial diversity and inclusivity. Wonder just if you have any thoughts about how the travel industry in particular can address that.
Yeah, sure. So, I think just like panning all the way back for a second, like I'm actually quite optimistic. And, there's the sort of adage that, the first step is to admit you have a problem. And I think America has sort of taken that first step and said, oh, we do have a problem. And, so many things have changed in the United States, and I'm taking a very sort of American-centric view here. So many things have changed over the last 5 months, and a lot of it has just been terrible. But, the one bright light is that acknowledgement, right? That everyone sort of stood up at the same time and acknowledged this elephant in our history and in our present and in our heads. And that happened inside of our company as well. So I think, what's interesting is like tech in particular seems to only be able to digest one or maybe two, social trends at a time. And, even when we spoke at the PhocusWright conference about sort of women in technology and women in travel, I think for some reason we were only able to digest this one, or maybe there was another element of sort of social inclusion and progress in antiquated forms of thinking. And that was very focused on sort of, in my world, women in tech. And in some ways that almost was like distracting from, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, like the progress we're making and the commitment to gender equality and diversity and having women, side by side in the boardrooms of America, an unmitigated good. But in some sense, because of our, certainly again in the tech industry, our inability to hold more than one radical idea in our heads at the same time, it meant that we weren't paying enough attention to racial equality and diversity and inclusion. And so, I'm happy that it's on the agenda. And I think many people are sort of reckoning with the fact that, it hasn't been on the agenda, and it should have been, and we need to take responsibility for that. So I think, how do we move forward from here? Not 100% sure, but I know that the answer is going to come from conversation, from dialogue, and that's beginning to happen in this country. And, I was so happy to hear yesterday that we're having a woman of color on our presidential ticket in the United States. Like, that is just wonderful news. And I have to say, for one of the first times in my lifetime, and certainly for the first time in the last 4 years, I feel like saner minds may prevail and that we might actually move forward together, all of us. And that feels like just a wonderful thing.
And I should mention, as related to keeping the conversation going, so PhocusWright has repositioned its initiative to diversity in leadership, and that will be debuting at the PhocusWright Europe online event on September 2nd. Yeah, there's going to be some research presentation, a case study, and a panel discussion on equity in leadership.
Great.
So that should certainly be a nice step forward with that. We are about out of time, Richard. It went quickly. We covered a lot. I really appreciate all of your insights, and thank you so much for joining us. And certainly a lot there to unpack and keep track of, I guess, as the weeks and months unfold. See how all of this pans out. So once again, we'd like to thank our partner Salesforce for working with us on this interview series. As the industry looks into the second half of 2020, you can embark on a new safe era of travel with Salesforce CRM. Look for more details on that in the story that will accompany this interview that will be published on PhocusWire. And we'll see you next time. Thanks.